You're live.
Thank you very much, Noreen, and welcome to the October NHS Cheshire CCG governing body meeting. This is a meeting which we're holding virtually because of the continuing COVID-19 situation. And I can remind everybody this is a meeting in public rather than a public meeting. It will be live streamed and recorded and published onto our website. This is a little bit of an additional meeting because we had a very busy agenda last month and didn't complete all the items of business, and so we extended over and are having a public meeting this month when ordinarily we wouldn't have had one, but we are conducting this meeting in a sort of a short format with not all of the usual items that we would have on our agenda. Before we start proceedings, I'd like to welcome Christine Morris, who, of course, Christine has been on the governing body since our inception, but because of the COVID-19 emergency, she went to be the chief nurse at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Trust over at Bowen, and has been working on the front line during the COVID. So I think that was very worthwhile, but we're very welcome back, Christine. And the other item that I'd like to add is that Matt Tyra is able to join us, and Matt, who last time was the acting Director of Public Health and now is the Director of Public Health. So congratulations on that, Matt. Regarding the COVID-19 and everything that's happening and what the NHS is presently trying to do, and the great focus on restoration, with recognising the importance of the work that the NHS has always done that wasn't related to COVID. And of course, a lot of that work got stopped or got curtailed in recent months. And there's an awful lot of effort now going into restoring those services and catching up with some of the backlogs that have been in place. I think it'd be right to acknowledge that work that's going on, and acknowledge the relentless work that staff across care services have been undertaking to do that. Having gone through COVID and the difficulties of that in sort of the first wave, they haven't had the opportunity to have a summer of relaxation, because it has been all hands to the pump to get services back and running and to catch up with some of the work that wasn't previously done. Of course, that work is continuing, despite the fact that, of course, there now are increases in COVID-19 cases again. Fortunately, not to the same degree in certain terms of healthcare activity that there was on the first wave, but certainly there is an increasing number of cases. I particularly want to acknowledge the work that practices have been doing and will continue to do for some time yet around a extended flu campaign, which has had to be done under more difficult circumstances. And I think on the back of that, for both of those things, for both the restoration and the flu campaigns, make the point that the NHS is operating in a COVID secure way. And what the last thing that any of us around this table would want is for people not to be seeking the care that they should be seeking because they are concerned about catching COVID-19. The chances of catching COVID-19 in a healthcare setting are now extremely low, and it's probably a much higher risk in a number of things people would be doing in their day-to-day life than there is in a healthcare setting. Our directors of public health will know all the figures well, and might want to comment on that as well. But I think it's an important thing to say, because there is a balance here, and people do need care, and if people need to seek care, we would want them to do that. Right, that's just my opening bit and setting some context. We'll move on now to our apologies for absence. And we've got two people listed, both of whom are actually have managed to make it. So are there any other apologies that we're aware of, Mandy?
No further apologies.
Okay, thank you. And I can just confirm that we are correct. That moves us on to section 1.2, which is declarations of interest. All members have previously made declarations of interest, which are published on the CCG website. Is there anything that anybody wishes to particularly raise and make a note of regarding the agenda that is before us today? No. Okay. I will just make the point, which we will discuss again at the item, but my wife does work in the charitable sector, and we have a paper on how we are going to grant to the charitable sector, although my wife works in a hospice, and that isn't specifically covered in these proposals, but I wanted to be upfront about that. Thank you.
Andy, is it all right if I come in there? Sorry, I meant to say earlier, I've got the same situation. I work for one of the organisations we give a grant to. It isn't included in those proposals, but because it's a grant receiving organisation, I just wanted to flag it up. I'm not a voting member of the governing body, but obviously I just wanted to flag that up to you.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you. That's well, note that, but I agree it's not a direct conflict, and you haven't got to vote. Right.
Andy,
okay.
Sorry, as well. I'm the honorary treasurer of Just Drop In, a Macclesfield-based voluntary body. So
okay.
I need to declare an interest over that.
And that may be included in the considerations, mightn't it? I think the point is made is that what we're deciding today is our mechanism to award, not actually an award. So I think the conflicts are all diminished, but I think it's right that we are upfront and open, transparent about them. Okay. Anybody else wish to make a comment? No.
I volunteer and I'm a beneficiary of a number of the organisations that Cheshire CCG currently fund, although I'm not involved as a board member, but that's in all my declarations of interest. But just as I'm involved, just wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you. I think it's right that that's aired. Any further comments on declarations? No. Okay, thank you. That takes us then to consider the minutes of our previous meetings. We have 2 minutes to consider. The first starts on page 3. Mandy, have we received any comments in writing about those minutes?
Yes, we have from Pam Smith. Very small typo.
If they're just typographical errors, we'll take them as
yeah, the typo. Yeah, all typographical.
That might be change the meaning of the minutes.
No.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody wishing to comment further on the minutes? Anything that is missing or anybody feels is inaccurate? Lovely, thank you. So that was the minute starting on page 3. In addition to those minutes, we have, so those first minutes on page 3, this for the 17th of September 2020, which is our substantial governing body meeting. But we also have a meeting for an extraordinary meeting, which is held on the 29th of September 2020. And in a way, an explanation as to why we held a meeting that we didn't invite the public to. We originally believed that meeting was not going to be quorate, and therefore an urgent decision needed to be made by the governing body. And so we were convening a panel to make an emergency decision, but invited all governing body members. And if members recall that when we actually managed to turn up, we thought we wouldn't be quorate, but we were quorate. So rather than use the emergency provisions within our constitution to make an emergency decision based on the authority of the accountable officer or chair, having consulted with 2 other governing body members, rather than use that mechanism, as we could hold a full governing body, we did hold a full governing body. That then caused the issue that, of course, we then held a full governing body not in public. Now, I think that was the right decision, that we should have held a governing body rather than an emergency panel, but it did cause us the problem that we didn't therefore hold it in public. So we are publishing the minutes for that meeting today for openness and transparency, but also we need to agree that those were an accurate record. So is there anything been received previously, Mandy, about the second set of minutes, which is the 29th of September 2020?
One small typo, which wasn't significant, but has been corrected.
Lovely, thank you. Is there anybody got any further comments on that set of minutes?
Andy, I put something in the chat.
All right, sorry, I
If
haven't.
I can come in. So on page 18, I think it is, it just mentions that in the discussion we talked about what acute providers would be able to offer as workforce. I don't know if we've had any clarification on what the offer would be as workforce from acute providers in relation to hot hubs.
Sorry, just say that again for me. I was trying to open the chat at the same time so I could read these comments. And
so it's on page 18, if I remember rightly, and it's related to hot hubs. And there's a comment about providers, what the acute providers will be offering as a potential workforce. And I wondered if we'd had any clarity on that. We may not yet, but if we've had any clarity.
as a matter arising, is anybody, Neil, you may be able to comment on that?
Do you want me to make a comment? It will differ between the models, and some of the models are more mature than others. What I would say is that the funding would not be coming from this budget, because the staff would already be being funded from within their block payment. So the integration between secondary care and primary care isn't financially linked, but as I say, I'm aware there are different conversations going on. So for example, in the East one, I know that the GP out of hours team, I know you may say that's not acute, but it is employed through an acute contract, are being part of the integrated model. But as I say, that's not, unless we are bringing additional capacity into their services, we aren't putting any more money into the secondary care providers. They're just moving resource around. If that answers the question you're trying to ask.
Resource being workforce.
Yes.
Yeah. And just again, I should have put it ahead of time, a potential typo. So in the same block on page 18, where it says, why is this not funded through the COVID-19 monies? The sentence doesn't quite make sense after it. It says, for the first 6 months of the year, all COVID-19 was paid for by NHS EI. So I assume that's all COVID-19 activities were paid for rather than COVID-19 itself.
Yes, let's not start a conspiracy theory.
Sorry.
Right, okay, we can correct that. Is there any further comments? Okay, we do have some advance. There is a typo which we'll note on page 19, and on page 4 we have Matt down not as acting when he should have been acting, but he's no longer acting. But we will correct that for historical reasons. Thank you. Anything further on those, or can we move forward? We will then move forward. Thank you to the action log and matters arising. So we've done one matter arising. Are there any further matters arising? In which case we'll go to the action log, and I think we have very small writing on the action log. So the action 5 is says ongoing, but we think we can move that because it's being picked up in the COVID group, and then 5 quality and safeguarding. So with agreement of colleagues, we will take that off the governing bodies action log and move that on to quality and safeguardings. Action 11 is still ongoing, but it will be completed in November, so that can stay on. And action 12, it's scheduled to be finished in November. Actions 12 and 13 have been completed and can be removed from the action log. Is that acceptable? Any disagreement? No, thank you. That moves us on then to the slot where we often have a patient story, but this month we have a staff story. So we have a video. And if we can get the technology to work, we will play you this video now.
The diversity of staff working in the NHS is an asset which helps make the NHS strong. That's why NHS Cheshire Clinical Commissioning Group is celebrating Black History Month to reflect on the past, acknowledge the present, and look to the future. While it's important to remember how far we've come, the experiences of the past few months have shown us that it's more important than ever to take this opportunity to look forward and truly bring the people promise to life. Lorraine Weeks-Bailey from NHS Cheshire Clinical Commissioning Group tells us her story.
Hi, I'm Lorraine and I'm the Senior Primary Care Accountant for NHS Cheshire CCG. I've worked in the NHS for approximately 14 years doing different roles within the finance teams. This is Black History Month and I see this as an opportunity for us to reflect on the contribution of Black staff, past, present and future. So what does Black History Month mean to me? Black History Month is a catalyst for learning, self-discovery and international recognition. Black History Month is a reminder that we are not new and that we are people of importance. I feel supported in my work and remain passionate about working for the NHS because we are united by a desire to provide the very best healthcare and make a difference no matter what our ethnicity and what our beliefs are. I've been supported through my roles to be passionate and I've always been encouraged to learn and develop new skills. I'm proud to work at NHS Cheshire CCG.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think in that Lorraine said that she was passionate, and I think we all know Lorraine, and I think we can all confirm that she is indeed passionate. And that was helpful and thought-provoking. Are there any comments from the governing body about Lorraine's video? Linda.
I'd just like to say thank you to Lorraine for doing that. That was very good of her to do that. So just say thank you. I think she's a great member of staff. Credit to us all.
Lovely, thank you. I'm afraid that colleagues are probably putting something in the chat, but I seem to have lost my chat. So if they might just put your hand up. I think Chris, you had your hand up, and I will find.
Yeah, just to pass on what Linda said. Thank you for doing that, and I think it's brilliant. And I just think with these patient stories, they're amazing, and I think, but what next? So, and I think those are conversations we had and we're having, and I just really think the Black History and the diversity and inclusion agenda is something that I'm really glad we're going to start addressing.
Absolutely. I think there are a number of items on today's agenda where the burning question is, and now what? So what? And there are a number. I think that the Black Lives Matter, the patient engagement, and the climate change are all, when I looked at our businesses, I thought these are all questions of, so now what? So where's the action? Where's the delivery? What are we going to do? I think that very much is that.
And I think it's a chance to live the values.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, then if there are no further comments, I'll just add our thanks to Lorraine for doing that. And I hope that it will sit with us throughout the rest of the meeting. So thank you, Lorraine, for that. That takes us now to the public question and answer session. Because this meeting is a meeting in public rather than a public meeting, we receive questions in advance. We haven't received any questions in advance of this meeting. I would, however, just like to highlight that the reason that we hold this meeting is because the engagement and communication strategy we didn't finish on our last meeting, and we moved it over to this meeting, and there was a member of the public, Mr. Cairns, who asked a question specifically around that. I can see it on our action log. It's a completed item that we have communicated an answer to Mr. Cairns, but I wondered whether when we do that that item we could have Mr. Cairns' questions in mind and make sure that it's covered actually within the meeting as well. So I'll move on then to our section 3.1, which is our accountable officers report. Please, Claire. Claire, I think you might be muted.
apologies. So I'm going to take it as that everyone's read the report, so I'm not going to go into it in detail this month. Just wanted to raise 3 points really. Andrew's already highlighted the conversation and the ongoing issue of COVID. I think it's just worth remembering that both our local authorities are currently in the high tier, but obviously our neighbours in the Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester, well, Greater Manchester from 1 minute past midnight tomorrow morning will be in very high. So I think it's just something we need to be cognizant of, and we could move, our 2 local authorities could move into very high at any minute. I think it's also worth saying, you know, Andrew has thanked our Cheshire providers and partners. I'd like to reiterate my thanks, but also thanks to the staff in the CCG. I want to pay special thanks to John Grant in terms of the work he's doing around all the work and he's doing around testing. I think that's really helpful in terms of testing and tracking, working with the local authority colleagues. But I don't think sometimes our colleagues lower down the organisation who don't sit at the governing body get the sufficient thanks that they are due. Just like to thank Lorraine for coming. I did have my hand up, but I'll bring it into here. I think it's really important that we use both the governing body to reflect and pay tribute to our Black workers, but also I think, you know, as myself working with Dr. Mike Clark as the inequalities lead for the governing body, I think this is a really important agenda, and I think we'll be bringing more papers in terms of people plan inequalities updates to coming meetings. So I just wanted to raise that. And also mental health day last week, just want to raise that. We have obviously during COVID understand that there are an awful lot of more people who are suffering from mental illnesses, and we need to focus on mental well-being in all of our work. So I think it's important, and I'm grateful to the communication engagement team who have done an awful lot of work around this. But I think it's one of our priorities in terms of health and well-being, and I think it's really important that the governing body recognise that work. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm very happy to take questions, and I'll answer those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Just to allow colleagues know, I have got my chat back, so I can take chat if you want to speak. Pop something into the chat box. But Matt, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to come in to offer my thanks as well on behalf of the local authority for the work of the CCG staff. As you said, you've mentioned John Grant, but lots of individuals working very hard, both with my teams and teams from the acute trusts and other organisations to make sure that we are getting the best kind of whole system approach and place-based approach to tackling COVID. So a huge thanks from me as well on that one. And also on the mental health day side of things, I think you're absolutely right. The burden of that as we continue to move through the COVID situation is going to be very, very big. And I think that highlighting it in the work that the CCG is doing, as well as the work that we're doing in the local authority and across Cheshire and Merseyside with the CHAMPS Directors of Public Health Network, will all come together to keep things, hopefully, at a system level supportive and keep people well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions on the Accountable Officer's report? So
we've got Fiona and Pam.
If I can just write, I cannot see the chat. If you want to pop something, if you'd like to speak into the chat, but we'll take Pam and then Fiona.
Okay, I'd just like to make a comment really. Well done on the Community Equipment Partnership Agreements. I think that's a real good piece of work. But I would have a plea that we, whatever the specification is that comes out of it, it includes recycling, please. I think too many of our equipment, pieces of equipment, I see them on skips, tips, and goodness knows where. So just a plea for that. Thanks.
No, I think, thank you, Pam, and thank you for bringing that up. This is a really good piece of partnership work and something that we've been aspiring to for a long time. And I think it's great that we've been brave enough to let another organisation commission on our behalf. But you're right, in terms of that sustainability agenda, I think absolutely recycling is absolutely key. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fiona, you wanted to comment?
Hi, yes, thanks. So thank you, Claire, for the report. I thought it was written in a great way and I could read it quickly and understand it without any kind of complicated and what's actually between the lines here. So I really enjoyed the report. I would also, one of the things that also occurred to me was about the recycling. I do worry that we have a lot of single-use equipment, and I know it's worse because of COVID, and but I'm aware that we now single use some things that we didn't used to, and so I wonder whether there is a piece of work that could be done there. However, my two other questions were the ADHD, which continues to be a bugbear. I know that there is ongoing work with that, and I'm just I know what, when I looked at the dates that you'd put there about you know, what we were doing with NICE guidance and whatever, I just need to keep that up there. The GP's still unsure what they're doing, and so as soon as we have the exact pathway and who's supposed to be doing what, can I make a big plea to whoever's in charge of that to make sure that gets out. And the second one was about the was 5.7. If you remember, we talked last time about the NHS 111, which are just about that's just happening, and so I'd just quite like to have that flagged up as something that we come back to in a few months, because as with everything, you know, it's all very manageable at the moment, you know, from where I'm sitting, but that often happens and people think, oh, that's working well then, but I'd be interested to know in 4 or 6 months whether that's overwhelmed. So I'd just quite like to keep that on somebody's radar so that it's not just thought that's going well and then it all goes kind of into meltdown as well. Those are my two comments.
Thanks, Fiona. I think in terms of the ADHD, I mean, that will obviously be managed by the performance team, but we'll come to strategic commissioning and performance in terms of updates. But we can share, you know, that sort of information with all governing body members, whether you attend strategic commissioning and performance or not. Clearly, we need to see that waiting list going down as soon as possible. Now we've made that investment, and obviously it's not just the investment, it's the conversation and that joint sort of approach and specification service working with Cheshire Rural Partnership. I think in terms of 111 first, yes, so all the background work's being done at the moment, and thanks to Neil and his team for leading this. Clearly you can see we've got the first webinar tomorrow, and I understand we're the first CCG, I'm not sure if it's in Cheshire and Mersey or the North, doing such sort of work with the to inform them on what the service offer is. But yes, I think absolutely right. We'll bring back some early evaluation and information on the scheme probably after Christmas. So we need to give it a bit of a run in really, because I think Mid Cheshire is starting something like the 10th of November, and the Countess in East Cheshire by the end of the month. So it'll take a good couple of months to sort of get some data, but we'll bring something back as soon as we can.
Yeah, so my plea almost is that we do it at 2 months and at 6, because I think at 2 months it'll be working fine. It's whether at 6 months it still is. Yeah.
I mean, you'll see if you were able to attend the webinar, or we'll put it online. There's an awful lot of information and some lessons learned from obviously Blackpool and Warrington, who have already gone live with this, so we can share that. But I think you're right, it's sort of an early doors evaluation, but then we need to sort of see how it works longer term. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. I haven't got anybody else wishing to speak other than I think Tracy is going to make a comment about the recycling. So if you could do that quickly for us, Tracy, and then we will move on.
It was only if needed, but yeah, the plan is that the service specification for community equipment across Cheshire includes the requirement for recycling. We absolutely, totally agree. So really, really helpful comment. So that was all I was going to add to Claire's points. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Chris Lynch has got his hand up, Andrew.
Okay, Chris, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick one. I've been involved with East Cheshire on the NHS 111 First work. So I shifted around some of my hours. So I now attend weekly that high-level strategic meeting. So I'm happy to sort of feed back in on how that's going. I think as much as it's just about that sort of basic clinical minimum at the moment, I think you're talking about, you know, engagement and co-evaluation in phase 1 and then phase 2 and phase 3. You know, I think it has some real potential as technology allows it. So I think it's really interesting work, and it should really stay on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm sure you're adding that work with your perspective of patient involvement. So thank you very much for that. Right, let's move forward if we can. So thank you very much, Claire, for that report. We're asked to note it, which I think we are able to do. And we're moving forward to 4.1, which is the engagement and communication strategy, which I think any second we'll ask Matthew to start on. And this is one of those items, as we've got several on the governing body agenda today, I think we will be in agreement with, and I'm certainly really pleased to see a bold and new direction for communications and engagement for us. What I'd like us to focus on in these items is not sort of confirming our agreement, but checking where we don't agree, checking if we want to increase the ambition or where we think needs to be added to, and on making this real and delivering what our role is in assuring that happens. So if you have those things in mind when we do have our section of comments afterwards. So Matthew, can I hand to you please for the starting off this section?
Thank you, Andrew. So we're going to split this up between me and Katie, but mainly Katie, you'll be glad to hear potentially. I just wanted to take the opportunity really to thank Jonathan Taylor, who would normally be here today, is just unable to make today's meeting, who has led on this with Katie alongside a number of you around the table. So hopefully you'll get to see your fingerprints in this document and see where your contributions have been made. And I'd just like to thank your time for doing that as well. But equally importantly, I'd like to really thank our staff, our comms team, and members of the public who have taken the time over many months, over some difficult situations, to consistently engage with us to help shape this sort of framework. Katie will go into no doubt more detail on this one, but just to really reiterate, this is still quite developmental. It's not the finished article. It's not intended to be, and we want to change it to meet the needs, especially where we are now. So just again, picking up on your point, Andy, really just be mindful of that. We can keep improving, and it's also picking up from earlier conversations. Our aspiration is to lead from the front. So this might be our framework, but we want to see this picked up by our partners and the way they do it as well. And Katie will go into a little bit more detail about that. So I'll hand over to Katie. Katie, are you wanting to talk to the presentation on the screen?
If I could have the slides up, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll hand over to Katie.
Thank you very much. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Katie Brownbill. I'm the Head of Communications, Marketing and Engagement. Next slide, please. So for those that have a slight fear of death by PowerPoint, please don't worry. The main outline strategy is between slides 13 and 28. I'm just going to talk through some of the key points. And in order just to clarify, what you see as a PowerPoint presentation absolutely is not the envisaged final product. We are working with our newly formed readers panel to generate a plain language accessible document. So they'll be working with us following any comments and updates from today to produce a final document. Thank you, Noreen. Next slide. Matthew's already mentioned this, but we were absolutely clear from the outset that the key to developing our approach is making sure that it continues to be shaped by involvement, those that have an interest in the CCG's work, but also that ultimately are impacted by the way that we deliver our communications and engagement, be that our governing body lay members, engagement with existing forums from the previous 4 CCGs, and more recently, the wider public through a period of engagement and feedback. Next slide. Our starting point was actually back in early 2020, if you think that far back, and we did do the usual empirical research, desktop research, but we put a lot more emphasis on talking to people. This slide shows some of the people that we had a conversation with, and the conversation was very much framed around an appreciative inquiry. It was positive and it was active, trying to gain feedback without any preconceived ideas of what it may or may not have looked like. We heard that The CCG should lead on bringing people together, developing what someone called a network of networks. We were asked very specifically to close the loop, so to let people know the impact that their involvement had made, but equally, if we weren't able to do things differently, be open and honest and let them know why. Our CCG staff asked us to place the same emphasis and principles on the way that we engage with them as we do with our patients and public. And we were asked to do more to understand and respond to the diverse needs of the different communities of Cheshire, and that this may be different at different times. Next slide. We then moved on to between May and September of this year. And from the initial feedback at the start of the year, we developed our draft strategy and we shared it. We were genuinely really proud of the intentions of the strategy and the way in which we pulled it together. This slide shows the breadth of activity that we undertook in that time period. Hopefully you will have seen some of our engagement activity, and we did hold a dedicated Cheshire chat supported by both Matthew and Chris. Some headline feedback from that engagement was that it's important we continue to work with people to ensure steps are taken for them to have a voice in their community. Time and time again, we heard the word co-production. And personally, my favourite, we were challenged a little bit as to why we use terms like engage when what we really mean is ask, talk and listen. It's still an active process. This paper was published in September and then again in October for the governing body paper, and we've had lots and lots of feedback and challenging conversations still following that. Next slide. You'll see what we've taken to the version of the strategy that's with you. And we've all talked about this. Claire and Andy's talked about this at the start. COVID-19 has impacted our engagement, and there has been a significant digital shift just because we've had to. However, we completely appreciate that levels of digital literacy are different, accessibility varies across our community, and hopefully you'll see that we very much realise that one size does not fit all, and that we'll continue to deliver engagement that meets the needs of our population. However, we clearly can't do this alone, and we need to continue to work with our ICPs, our local authorities, with Healthwatch, our community sector and NHS partners to have the biggest impact particularly on our strategic priority of reducing health inequalities. Next slide. So we heard from those that responded that co-production was key. This diagram is taken from the Coalition for Collaborative Care, and the 7 steps did seem to resonate with people that gave us the feedback. As a CCG, we're seeking to develop a common understanding and approach to co-production. So what this means for us as a CCG, for our staff, but also for our wider residents. And we're keen to develop a framework of co-production that will support the delivery of our engagement and involvement. I think we say it goes without saying, people with lived experience really are the best people to advise. Next slide. This cycle here, you'll have probably seen an engagement involvement cycle before, but this has evolved particularly through a dialogue with Healthwatch, and is a conscious move away from the kind of very top down of you said we did to a very more collaborative approach of you said we will. This is from an engagement and involvement perspective, and we'll run through all of our planning, delivery and evaluation, but I think the principles can be adopted in all of our commissioning. You know, there's a phrase such as we agreed as well that would be really nice to resonate through this cycle. Next slide. So with Andy's introduction ringing in my ears, the kind of so what and the how is how we've been challenged throughout all of this. And this slide shows how we might put that into action. I've mentioned before, we don't have any plans to work in isolation, and quite often the NHS isn't the best organisation and best placed to engage and involve our communities. We're continuing to work with our local authorities, ICPs and Healthwatch, particularly with things like the residents panel, to make best use of what is already there. We're looking to lock in the benefits that we've found through COVID, to work either to speak as One Cheshire or as a place where appropriate. And this residents panel, working with our partners, is a way that we can do that. If we drill down into more detail, and this was something I know that Gus Cairns asked specifically about last month, was our engagement reference group. Feedback has suggested that this might be better called the Cheshire Co-Production Group, which we do actually really like as an alternative title. Very briefly, this group will be made up of residents and community representatives who will work alongside professionals. I've spent a bit of time on webinars for best practice, and particularly an ICS in London spent time pulling together this sort of reference group, and they actively discriminated the membership to make sure that it really was a genuine representation of communities. So that's something we're considering for this group. It's also likely to have a fluid membership as and when we need people, to ensure that those with the lived experience that sit within our co-production principles really are able to participate. The idea of a network of networks can be delivered here, and we'll ask those who are involved in our reference group to actually come forward and represent their communities, actively seeking their views and then bringing to this table. These are our ambitions. We don't have anything firm. We want this reference group to be very much a plan of co-development. I also want to take a little bit of time to talk about patient participation groups. In the second phase of the COVID response, there was a clear ask from NHS E&I in a letter for practices to start to reignite engagement with their patients. Our role is to support this reconnection and to provide guidance to our practices. However, as a strategic commissioner, we want to bring our PPGs together on a place footprint twice a year. These PPG networks are an opportunity to share best practice, learning, and see if there's opportunities to work collectively. We've started to reignite these conversations with our ICPs, so we're starting to put these and co-produce the principles of these. These are in train. As we've gone through our engagement, we've been challenged as to how our residents can feed up into the CCG. And the engagement reference group and the PPG network are ideal opportunities for those. Next slide. So I'm going to close with a sense of what's happening and what the next steps would be. Next slide, please. The Insight and Intelligence Report is something we're excited about as a tool for both the CCG and our residents. When we're developing our commissioning plans, we need to consider feedback received from a range of external and internal sources, whether that's the comms and engagement team, the patient experience team, Healthwatch, CQC, and our providers. This data can be used to inform commissioning and contracting decisions and feed into that cycle. Building on feedback and ongoing dialogue through the Quality and Safeguarding Committee, we've been producing the first cut of what we've called a new look Insight and Intelligence Report that's intended for publication 3 times a year. And we're working with our internal audiences through our programme teams to see how this looks and feels and what we can do to make this document really feel meaningful for people. I also wanted very quickly to talk about the MIAA audit, which was recently carried out, reviewing both this development of the strategy and our plans to embed the resident's voice in the commissioning cycle. We've had the results back with a substantial assurance opinion. Next slide. So to conclude, a quick reminder that this will not be a PowerPoint presentation. As and when we've got to a point where we can share it, it will be in plain language so it is accessible. Cheshire Chat, which we will have seen on the slide with the networks, is already in train. It was actually last night we held our 4th virtual Cheshire Chat, where we talked about the work of primary care and started to introduce NHS 111 first to our residents. We're putting a lot of emphasis on reconnecting with our place patient groups to reignite that conversation. And as I said, we've been learning from systems all over the country. A key next step is our reference group to generate that network of networks and start to co-produce what that looks and feels like. And I'm sure Chris could comment on this, but to work around our underpinning principle of co-production. We're actually meeting the NHS England Head of Public Participation in December to discuss how we can move this forward. I hope that that's provided a useful update on the journey that we've been to get to share this strategy with you at the governing body, and how we really are taking the opportunity to ask, talk and listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was a very interesting presentation, and I think really important that we are moving forward with this as an agenda. And I think that's very much in line with what the governing body is passionate about doing. I've not received any requests to comment in the chat box, so I will ask a question, and we may be able to move on. My question really is linked into my opening remark, and it's a question for Katie and perhaps for the wider executive team. Is how are we going to measure, monitor, and assure ourselves of delivery of this agenda over the next year and the years after that? Now, are we clear about that? Where this will be picked up, and knowing, and how can we be assured that delivery is actually happening and that we are making a real difference on this? We've definitely got an ambition, so I want to move forward to, okay, how do we assure that it's definitely going to happen?
I think this is the start of our conversation with you as a governing body, and I think by displaying this as ambition, it's the start of the conversation. Have I frozen?
No, keep talking.
Katie, we can hear you.
Yeah.
So I'll just put my little bit in as well. So I think part of what we're going to hear about, whether it's successful or not, is absolutely through all these networks that we're going to be supporting, and they will tell us whether it's successful or not. But equally, going forward for the future, we need to see how this works for our primary care networks, our care communities, and our ICP partners. So working very closely to see if they can adopt some of these, which they've helped shape, will also help us demonstrate whether we are actually meeting what our ambitions are here. And in some respects, whether that's us as a CCG or whether it's our partners, it shouldn't really matter as long as our residents can see where they are making a difference and are actively involved in our decisions as well. And it's a collective we and a collective our. I don't know where Katie's gone. Has she gone?
We may have lost Kate.
I'll take them all.
Okay, so I've got a number of people who ask questions. I apologise, but we are going to be very restricted on time. We're now 2 agenda items behind, unfortunately. So if people could keep things brief, I would note that a number of people have indicated their support for the presentation and the approach in the chat box, which I think is really important. So Fiona, you've got a question. You're on mute, Fiona.
Sorry about that. I'm a very good example of levels of digital literacy differing, which is what you said at the beginning. So it's my question is around the we that you have in quite a few of these. So we've talked about before the you said we did, and you've asked about the moving round to you said we will. My comment about that is that we also need to have the honesty element that you talked about in here about the we will not be able to because and then I didn't quite understand the we said we did because I wasn't sure who the we was. So is that we the co-producers or whatever? It was just a definition of the who is the we said we did, because it could, to me when I first read it, it was like it was going back to the paternalistic. We said we'd do it and we did it, as opposed to we all said. See what I mean? Just the way it came across to me.
I apologise for losing my network. I'm back now. I think you're right. I think the word probably is missing is collectively. So again, it isn't that paternalistic. We will you know, that kind of there, it is something that we will work together so that everyone can see the part that they've played and the difference that it's made, both to us as a commissioner, because the value of using patients is vast, and there's loads and loads of learning, so it's a real opportunity for us to work together.
Sorry, I was muted. Peter, want to come in, please?
Thank you, Katie and Matthew, and if you can pass on our thanks to Jonathan as well. Great confidence in what you're doing. The ask today is to agree what seems to be a developmental strategy, and I'm just concerned about how we process as a governing body any changes to that strategy if we agree it today. Just another point of information, you've already signalled the Mersey internal audit work that's going on. We will, of course, report that back to the governing body in due course. But again, I'm concerned about how the strategy might develop and whether we actually get visibility of that.
So Peter, you'll get regular updates as a CCG governing body, and if there was any major substantial changes to our direction for whatever reason, we would clearly report that back. Our subcommittees will hear different elements of this as well, and I think Katie's articulated there isn't one home, it's multiple homes for this. So there are certain elements with regards to the insight reports, there's certain elements with regards to, you know, the audit aspect of it. So give you assurance, I think you will hear it, and you'll probably hear it through different forums. But I think we still have a duty to bring updates to you as a governing body on how we are progressing on our developmental framework. There is always a question of when does it not be a development framework? When is it? I haven't got an answer for that yet, because the world is changing all the time. So I want that kind of fluid ability, which Katie's talked about, for us to be able to respond to the needs of our local population and our partners. I don't know if Katie wants to add to that briefly.
Yes, and I think this was what I was going to mention before I faded. This is our strategy. The delivery will obviously have a plan underneath it, and that plan will have to be measurable to be able to show the impact, and for us collectively as a team to be able to know if we're being successful and if we are meeting the needs of our strategy. So that will be this sort of more robust process that sits underneath our ambitions of the overarching strategy, and it'll be the tangible work that the governing body and our committees, our patients, public residents will start to see.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I suppose absolutely there needs to be a delivery plan, and it will have to have actionable stuff against that. So my question was more for the governing body to think, and perhaps this is something we'll pick up in our workshop on our board assurance framework, because I think this is something that we would expect to be reflected in our board assurance framework at that strategic level, as to whether we are delivering the strategy rather than delivering the operations, so that the operations add up to the strategic delivery. So perhaps that's something we'll pick up then. I've got a couple of comments which I'll just share, which is Claire again praising the work and the director of travel, and making the point that we don't want to do this in isolation, and that there are many partners who are doing similar work, and that this needs to be joined up, and we need to think about it as a system. I'm paraphrasing what Claire was saying. And Tracy again praising the work, supportive of it, making the point that perhaps we can communicate how do people join some of the groups that we are suggesting. So a point for members of the public who may be thinking, I'd like to be involved, how do we share those possibilities? And then I've got Wendy for a question, please.
Thank you. Just to really say, it was good to read, and it is a truly ambitious strategy. So congratulations on that. And I think given that we have ambitions to be very strategic and to incorporate everybody in it, it was great to see that you've really addressed that in this overview. I'm glad to hear that the underpinning how will be coming along, and I'll be really interested in that. And I suppose it's just really a question to say, are we considering the impact on staff who are going to be working quite differently with this strategy. It's not just your communications team. This means that everybody has to communicate with all our stakeholders in a dramatically different way, which can slow things down to make sure we get it right. And the impact on planning and the impact on ensuring that we do truly reflect things will mean that our people will have to work quite differently. So I suppose it's to just a plea to incorporate that support and any development needs for staff to be able to do that effectively within your operational implementation plan.
So if I can just quickly answer that one. Hopefully you can see how our behaviour charter and our strategic objectives are sort of threaded through this. So whilst you're absolutely right, Wendy, there's an implementation piece of work to do internally. It's all part of this wider side of things in terms of how do we change our culture, even more positively than what it is now around our behaviours. So if we achieve our behavioural changes that we want, we'll achieve our ability to deliver this strategy, not just with the comms and engagement team. I think just probably a final point for me in some respects, and this is a really good reflection I'm sure the NHS has seen over the last few months. There are times we are not the best place to deliver some of this stuff, and we have a tendency to say we'll create a group and we'll do this when actually others have already done it and they'll do it 1,000 times better than us. So I've been really reassured to see how the team is listening and actively engaging and hoping to engage with other organisations and groups and people who can actually tell us much better than what we would probably do ourselves. And again, that is a behavioural change for some NHS organisations, and hopefully you all applaud that, which I think I've heard in the comments and seen. So I just want to really finish off on that. We want to hear from a diverse range as staff and as our population as possible, not just always the people who can shout the loudest or type the loudest. It's just something we want to try and achieve if we can, and we will achieve it. I'll ask Katie, you want to ask anything more on that?
No, it was just I talked about how the ask from our staff was to reflect the engagement with them as much as we do with our patients and our residents. A key word is empowerment, and we realise that we need to support and empower our staff to understand the value and importance of engagement. So that is a key part of making this strategy live for everybody.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So I think we were in agreement that this is important work, and thank you very much for the presentation, Katie. I think we're all in agreement to take this forward. We're just keen to make sure that it happens as well as it can and as timely as it can. And we are asked to note the contents of the strategy, to provide comment, both of which I believe we have done, and to approve the strategic framework for the CCG's engagement and communications, which, looking at faces, I believe that we are in agreement. So thank you very much, Katie, and keep doing the good work. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye. That moves us on, thank you, to section 4.2, which is the community and voluntary sector grants arrangement, which Tracy, I believe that you're introducing for us.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct. Also ably assisted by Chris Lynch, and Amanda Ridge is going to help as well present this. We had Andy McAlevey geared up as well to help. He's having some technical problems getting onto the webinar, so he may not be able to join. So I'm just going to give you a very brief background, and then Amanda's going to talk you through some of the details on this, which we're asking for approval. So this paper began life back in February, when prior to, I think, COVID becoming such a big focus for all our lives. Back in strategic commissioning performance in February, we agreed the recommendations that are in the paper, and then it came to strategic commissioning and performance in September last month to update on the progress, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Behind the scenes has been a great deal of work, and the whole of the project team, including Adam McClure, need to be thanked and praised for the work that they've done to get the paper and the work to this stage. But the work was effectively asking us as a CCG what can we do with the funding that we provide to our community and voluntary sector? And I use that term as a catch-all term for lots of different organisations that often have different phrases attached to them, such as third sector or community sector. But how can we do that better and differently to fit with our plans to integrate more closely with a variety of different sectors and make sure that funding is used to best effect? And so that was the purpose of that paper. So just to be clear what is in and out of this paper, and Amanda's going to go into a little bit more detail with this, we're asking to make a decision and excluding the funding that is currently provided to hospices and anything that is jointly allocated with our local authorities. So it's the aspect of community and voluntary sector funding which is not in those areas that I've just described. The discussion that took place at Strategic Commissioning and Performance Committee last month, Linda Couchman from Cheshire East Council asked for a little bit more information. So I just want to assure committee members that Amanda and myself have had a very in-depth discussion with both local authorities, including Linda, Nicola Thompson, Helen Brackenbury from Cheshire West and Chester Council, Jennifer McGovern as well, and our ICP partners and other associated partners who are listed in that paper, so that all are aware of the process that we've been through and the discussions that have been had, and are, in my understanding, supportive of the process that we're going through. So I think that's just important to box that off, as it was something that came up at Strategic Commissioning and Performance. So I will leave it there, and Amanda's going to go into a little bit more detail, I think. But we're asking the governing body to approve, understanding the process that's been through, that we delegate the responsibility for the allocation of the funding to our third sector organisations, but that we do that through our two integrated care partnerships. That's what the recommendation is within that paper. So Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself and go into a little bit more detail?
Amanda, let me just jump in just to remind there was a 10-minute total on this agenda item. So the detail will have to be brief detail, please. Thank you.
Noted, thank you, Andy. Okay, my name's Amanda Ridge. I'm the Associate Director for the New Models of Care team. Before I start, Chris Lynch just wants to give a few words because he was actually a member of the panelist on the project team. Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So for those of you who don't know, particularly members of the public, my name's Chris. I'm a co-opted governing body lay member. I was appointed by the Strategic Commissioning and Performance Committee to be involved to work on this strategically. It's a subject close to my heart, as before I joined NHS Cheshire Clinical Commissioning Group, I helped you run a user-led mental health charity in Chester. In the past, I've been a recipient of these grants as a board member, and I've been a beneficiary of organisations that have had the grants. So I understand how important this money is to the community. I was the voluntary sector lead for number 71, so I understand, you know, that's the crisis cafe in Chester. So I'm aware of the power of the community voluntary and faith sector, and I couldn't be more pleased that how this is going to be working at the place level. So I'm going to pass back to Amanda, and she's going to go through some of the process.
Thanks, Chris. So I think the first thing to pick up, obviously you've all received the paper. It's to just identify the items that are in scope and the work that needs to happen there, and then I can talk through the process and how the recommendation came about. So in terms of the paper, there are 4 categories that are listed. So Tracy's outlined that sort of category 1 and category 4 are deemed to be out of scope. Category 2 and 3, the reason that they've been split out, there's one, category 2 are the recipients that receive their grant funding on an annual basis. You know, at the start of the year, they know that it's for a single year funding. We have the grant agreement in place, and then what's been happening previously is that they would reapply every year if they wanted to continue to receive grant funding. The second one, the category 3, is slightly different. We've got a number of recipients in there that align very closely to the commissioning and contracting intentions of the likes of Stroke Association, Neurotherapy Centre, Neuromuscular Centre. We know that they provide a massive support service to the health economy, and that if their grant funding wasn't received, that would cause would have a big knock-on effect from a health point of view. So we've split them out slightly differently because they're sort of set up in a slightly different way. So the piece of work that needs to take place, and we've outlined this in the next steps, is to work through those 2 different categories and find out exactly which of the grant recipients would be better aligned to the ICP or at this point in time. And then once we've worked through that, we can find out exactly what the figure needs to be. So that's the first thing in terms of the categories. In terms of the process, so as Tracy's outlined, we had a number of different conversations with each of the potential partners that we were looking at. So one was to do nothing, continue as it is, but we know that is not the best thing. We're not best placed to deliver against to get the best out of the process, really. So the other options one was to use our local authorities as our partners. One was to look at using the voluntary sector, the sort of umbrella area, the umbrella organisations as a partner, and the final option 4 was to look at the integrated care partnerships. So we had conversations with each of those partners, the prospective partners, to understand what their current setup is, how they would work, what their offer was almost. And then what we did was put a project team in place. It was completely impartial project team, so that we couldn't have anyone from voluntary sector, local authority or the ICPs on that because of the potential conflict of interest. So we had, as Chris said, we had the likes of Chris, we had Andy McAlevey from a clinical point of view, we had representation from finance, from contract, and we had Health Watch as well involved from that. So we had the voice of our residents. What that group did was pull together a set of principles or criteria which each of the partners will be tested against, and that involved quite a rich discussion, I believe, was the phrase that was used, in order to discuss all of those. And what came out of that very clearly was that the ICPs would be best placed to be the partner for and to take forward this piece of work. The main reason being, we've had previous discussions at governing body about the ambition of our commissioning with ICPs and with the integrated care partnerships. We know this is something that we want to do more of. We want to do it on a place-based footprint. So it made sense that it aligned with that ambition that the CCG has. We also think the ICPs are best placed to do this at a system level. So they're already working across the system, working with the local authority, working with the voluntary sector. So we think that they are best placed to bring this together. And we also know that they've got the links into the care community, so that they're very much working at care community level and understanding what the needs are and what the health inequalities are, etc. In terms of the recommendation, it was on the premise that the ICPs will work closely with local authorities and with the voluntary sector, and there's already voluntary sector on the East ICP board and on the West directors meeting. So they've already got that sort of infrastructure in place in terms of working as a system. That was the reason, excuse me, that's the reason for the recommendation. And then the other items that are in the paper, which I won't go through in detail because I know we've got very little time, but it talks about all of the next steps in terms of mobilising that. So with a view to starting this from April 21, where the ICPs will take it forward. But there's a lot of work that needs to take place beforehand in order to be able to grant, to award the grants from April 21. I think that covers it. Happy to take any questions. And Andy's on the chat, although he can't hear us, although he can't speak, he can hear and put something in the chat if he needs to. Is there anything else, Chris, before we pick anything up that you want to say?
Just to thank you, Adam, Andy, and everyone. I think what was really an interesting reflection was that if I didn't work for the CCG and I'd come in as a resident or patient, this would technically be co-created, co-designed, and the argument is that as a lay member, is it still? And I think Adam and Jonathan Taylor have picked up what helps in project management around what voice in the room is important. So I think this is just a win-win on so many levels, and it's great that this is coming through when the engagement communications is coming through. So thank you, Amanda and Andy.
Okay, thank you. I think Matt has got a comment. Matt.
Yes, very, very supportive of this approach to do this through the ICP. I think this is a really good opportunity to bring things together on a place footprint. And I know both myself, Andy, and Ashworth, representing West, are supportive of this approach. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Claire, you wanted to comment?
Yes, thank you. Very supportive. Thank you very much for the work. I think this fits really nicely our commissioning roadmap that we discussed last month in terms of direction of travel and delegation devolution of budgets and resources from the CCG into the ICPs in a very managed way. And I guess what we need to start looking at is the process to align CCG functional resource to support this sort of movement. I appreciate this isn't a big budget in total. However, I think it's a good example. It's something that we need to work through in that work, which we're bringing back next month, in terms of, you know, finance, contracting, other resource that needs to potentially align to the ICPs as we transfer budgets and services. But I think it's a good piece of work, so I'm very happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I've got Mike and then Paula wishing to come in. So Mike first, please.
Thanks, Chair. A quick question for clarity. Obviously, in the recommendation, it says for the ICPs to manage the allocation. So just understanding, is the funding actually transferring to the ICPs to be managed, or is it that the ICPs are managing it, but it's still held at the CCG? And regardless of what the answer is there, I can see that there's probably been about a 5% increase year on year in the funding. Is the expectation that that's going forward as well, that there'll be a 5% increase in the funding year on year?
Do you want me to answer, Tracy, or do you want to answer?
No, you answer. Amanda.
So in terms of the funding being transferred, yeah, the answer is yes. They will be in charge of the process, and the allocation of the funding will move to them from April 2021. In terms of future investment, we as a CCG committed to increasing spend in this area in our commissioning and contracting intentions. The actual percentage yet is to be determined once we know what the planning round looks like for next year. But yes, we have committed to continuing to invest in that area. Does that answer that, Mike?
Thank you very much.
It does, but it gives me an opportunity to quickly come in again. But if the budget is going over and the responsibility is with the ICPs, how are we going to assess how well they're allocating or using the funding against our ambitions, if you wish?
Yes, in the next steps, we've built in a 6-month review to understand whether they've delivered against the outcomes, and also to, you know, if we need to do anything in terms of changing the way that it's working, we can do that at that 6-month point.
Thank you. Paula, I believe, wants to come in, and we've got a question from Pam in the chat box as well. So, Paula?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Hi, Amanda. Just a point about the equality and quality impact assessment. It's great that we've done the high level one. I can see the timeline that shows that we're going to do a detailed more one. It was just a point on the fact that one of the rationales for moving this forward is around reducing health inequality. So it'd be really great to see two things, really, was to make sure that that comes through in the equality and quality impact assessment as it's detailed today as a rationale for doing that. And secondly was to make sure that perhaps some of the indicators we identified, the outcomes that are included probably in our sort of contractual agreement with the ICP for delivering on that. So I think it's about trying to use the framework to make sure that it's responsive to A, if it's addressing health inequality, show that as a positive through the assessment framework, and B, to ensure that translates through to the outcomes that we want to see delivered through the ICP. Let's not try and use different indicators and different aspects of the governance process.
Absolutely. So the health inequalities bit around the EQIA, we've absolutely included that. And then in terms of the delivering against the outcomes, all of this work will link into the wider piece of work that we're doing with the ICP around the outcomes framework, which is linked to some of the oversight framework and all of the other metrics that we have in place. So it will all be brought together rather than being separated out.
Thank you. I don't know whether anyone's had the opportunity to see Pam's comment, but it's about timescales and not wishing to destabilise the ICP. So if the money goes to ICPs in April, will they be allocating later in that year? And the concern there is about destabilisation.
the hope is that no, it would be allocated and then almost passported straight out to the third sector. So a lot of the work that will take place between now and the end of March will be about organising what the process is, having the involvement with the third sector, getting some sort of process in place in order for people to be able to apply for that grant to start from April 21, with a view to, as I say, almost passporting it through once it's allocated to the ICP from April, so that it shouldn't have a detrimental impact on the sector.
Sorry, Andrew, can I just on that, Amanda, can I just check from what you've just said? So who will be commissioning and contracting with the third sector? The ICP will be commissioning and contracting from April. So they will be doing that work with the third sector. It won't be the CCG. We need to transfer that responsibility before then. So they need to lead that process, don't they? That's what we're saying.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think that is all the comments and questions regarding that. Is there anything else anybody needs to raise? Okay, in which case we're asked to note the contents of the paper, approve the recommendation, the recommended partners, Cheshire East Integrated Care Partnership and Cheshire West Integrated Care Partnership, approve the potential transfer of the funds, which is £1.58 million, and approve the next steps which have been outlined to us. I think we're in agreement following our conversations to do that. Lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you, Amanda, for joining us for that.
Thank you.
Okay. And thank you to Andy, who's managed to contribute on chat, but not been able to get the technology to work otherwise. So thank you, Andy, as well. Right, now that moves on to our next agenda item. But before we do that, I think we need a conversation about the items we have remaining and the time that we have remaining. And the time we have remaining is 10 minutes, and we have 3 remaining items on the agenda. So 2 of which are time critical. So Western Park contract extension and the EPRR are time dependent decisions. And the climate change is very important. So we've got some decisions to make. The first thing I'm going to ask is, are people able to stay beyond 12 o'clock, and does that cause colleagues any problems? No, perhaps if anybody does indicate that they would be a problem to stay, I think realistically we're probably talking about 12:30, even if we're very speedy. Okay, nobody's saying that they can't stay, in which case we will remain correct. Okay, thank you, Matt. Absolutely, you don't affect our accuracy. We would like your contributions, but understand that if you need to go and understand how busy you are at present. So Matt may need to leave us, but I think others probably can continue. So if we carry on, then let's see what we can get through. That takes us then to item 4.3, which is the Western Park contract extension, which is Tracy Cole to present, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So Karen Burton is here to present the paper. I know she can present this with super precision and give you the key points because I've seen her do it before. So Karen, rather than me, will do that, give you the quick points, and then it is here for decision. So thank you.
Okay, can you all hear me? My name is Karen Burton. I'm an Urgent Care Performance Manager at NHS Cheshire CCG. I'm here to ask the governing body to approve the extension of the 16 beds at Western Park. I'll take you through the key headlines in the paper and then I'll take questions afterwards. So initially, just to give you a bit of background, the beds at Western Park were commissioned back in May of this year. The governing body then approved a further extension of 3 months to the 31st of October, and we're now here today to ask for that extension of 5 months from the 1st of November to the 31st of March 2021. This is about putting additional capacity in the system in preparation for winter and a second wave of COVID. It's absolutely in line with the national COVID-19 hospital discharge policy. The total cost of commissioning these beds is £445,000. That includes the cost of the beds at £1,150 per week and the supporting GP costs and the nursing costs. As I said, it's about putting resilience in the system. to meet the requirements of rapid discharge. The National Hospital Discharge Policy has 4 clear pathways, and pathways 2 and 3 of that hospital discharge policy will be the cohorts of patients going to Weston Park. And that's where short-term rehabilitation care needs to be provided in a 24-hour bedded care facility. However, during times of increased demand on acute beds, there may be a need to use those beds for other cohorts of patients. For example, where a package of care can't be sourced in the community, or where a person's normal place of residence they can't return to because of a COVID outbreak. We've used a collaborative commissioning approach to commission these 16 beds. We've worked with the local authority, East Cheshire Trust, the social worker, the GP. We've had a wealth of people in those meetings. We've had monthly contract and quality performance monitoring meetings. We've had those weekly since May. We've recently now moved to bi-weekly, and those will continue. You may know the history of Weston Park in Macclesfield. It's the largest care home in Macclesfield, and its CQC rating has been inadequate for a number of years. A recent CQC report on the 13th of August, it still requires overall improvement, but there has been a significant improvement in the management of that home. And as you can see, that's reflected in the feedback from families. That's an Appendix A of that report. And I go back to what Katie Brownbill said, that people lived experience, and I think that's reflected there. The 16 beds are in a standalone unit at Weston Park, with the ability to go up to another 16 beds if required. To date, we've had 55 admissions, 45 discharges. The average length of stay is 33 days. That is in line with the National Hospital Discharge Policy, which quotes 42 days, i.e. 6 weeks. We have had extended length of stays for a few people, and that's where transitional care is needed. For example, where a person has had a fracture and they need an amount of care and then their rehab can start, and that transitional care shouldn't be taking place in a hospital bed. Just to note, there is, and what's really important to note, there is no significant risk to the CCG, because the costs outlined in Table 3 will be charged against the hospital discharge policy. Those arrangements are in place from the 1st of September to the 31st of March 2021. We've asked for a clear exit plan for March 2021 to close those beds, and that's when the contract will cease. So we're now here to ask the governing body to approve that decision to commission those beds for a further 5 months. I hope that helps to give you the key headlines. And I'll take any questions.
Lovely, thank you very much, Karen. Are there questions? So Mike's got a question from the start.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for that. First off, yes, I'm supportive of the fact that the system needs these additional beds and the type of beds that are being commissioned. My question is more, it may take us a bit of time to look at this and analyse the data, but I suspect other patients that are in this same definition are actually going to other care homes, and there might be a bit of an inequity of the support provided to those care homes, both from funding for the GP going in, the additional support of the advanced nurse practitioner, etc. So it's just understanding what our aspiration is to roll out an equivalent support to patients that aren't in these 16 beds in other care homes of a similar fashion.
So as you know, we've got the long-term care for residents, and then we've got the short-term care arrangements. And I know that there is work going on to try and standardise and make sure that we do have equitable support services across. That's what these contract quality and performance meetings are about we're working with the local providers to make sure that we do wrap the right services around those care home beds. Does that answer your question, Mike?
To some extent, yes, but I suppose at some point it would be good to understand where else, which other care homes patients that are defined in this way are going to, other than the 16 beds at Weston Park, and then just comparing the offer to those beds cover. An example, my particular practice covers one other care home or nursing home in Macclesfield. We do have some similar patients with the same sort of turnaround time, relatively short stays without the additional support. So it's just mapping that as to where those patients are going and how we're going to support those patients in those beds.
Yeah, so Mike, just to clarify, that contract with the Rowan ceased on the 8th of October, but there was the same agreement in place.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got some comments around the quality. So from Suzanne and from Dan. And Dan says, have we been presented with a representative view of the patient feedback and comments, or is that a selected view that might be more positive? I think from Dan. And Suzanne asking, if Weston Park's had problems with its CQC, why have we chosen Weston Park?
I think we need to be working with care homes to ensure, I mean, did we want Weston Park to fail as a care home? I don't think that would be the way forward. So we have wrapped services around this care home to increase that quality of care. And the advanced nurse practitioner role, we are looking to extend that across other care homes with the work that we're doing going forward. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. I've heard this explained. Neil wants to comment, Neil?
I think the other reason, why did we choose Weston Park? Weston Park's a particularly large home with a number of standalone units in it. And these were, of course, commissioned in response to the COVID pandemic. And one of the clear reasons was we could set up a unit in a block that wasn't going to cause any cross-infection. The mitigating actions to respond to the quality, things, as Karen said, about putting in additional medical cover beyond what we'd normally have, additional advanced nurse practitioner and additional therapy cover. So we made it work because all of the pieces put together were the best fit we could find in Cheshire at that time. And the outcome here to say that it happened.
Absolutely. So Pam wants to come in, and I think Paula does. We will have to cut it up a little bit. So Pam.
I know, but like Suzanne, I've got a massive problem with commissioning with a home that's under enhanced surveillance, that for the last 5 inspections has not been compliant with the regulations and continues not to be compliant with the regulations in terms of medication. And there might not have been any harm done, but that just gives me no confidence that there's the massive potential of harm to be done to people. I can't support this. I can't.
Okay. Paula, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I guess I wanted to say that, you know, in the summer, we already approved an extension to this, and the situation that Pam just described was in place at the same time then. I guess for me, what I wanted to say was we were asked a point about whether this was representative of the comments in terms of those that have been put in. If you go to the CQC report that Pam's just described, there is a lot of very positive feedback in there from staff and relatives around Waterside as a unit. So I think what we see there is a clear improving position. Pam's point about breach regulations is that is also, CQC went back in the summer to do a focused inspection because of the number of breach regulations earlier in the year. And they found an improving position in relation to the breaches. Pam's right, there were breaches remain in respect of a particular aspect around regulation, safe handling of medication. I think one of the important things do there is to reflect on what assurance you get on the progress of that. CQC will only go back and visit at certain intervals. I think the important thing is where the focused regulation breach was and to get assurance around that particular, and there is an action plan on that. So it's probably an important point to go back and get that particular focused breach action plan looked at. And the other thing is to say that there is fortnightly oversight in terms of the care delivered through this home, and there is an additional input there in terms of the AMP, which I think adds to the assurance. And other people have asked as well about whether this is equitable or not. I would say in terms of the amount of input and support from the AMP in a practice, then add on the increased oversight meetings, that's additional to perhaps what we were doing in a number of other areas. And that's a point that's got me reflecting actually really is in terms of the equity and the equality around both input of wraparound services, but also as well as the oversight.
Thank you. So with an important and obviously passionately felt point made by Pam in terms of the home, I suppose my reflection would be it's got an improving CQC position, and we don't not commission off organisations that needs improvement from CQC. If we were to do so, we wouldn't be commissioning many services, unfortunately. And so I suppose we have to make a balanced judgment, don't we? And I suppose then is what assurance do we have around the service that has been running to date and the quality of that service that has been running to date. So I don't know whether Karen or others might want to comment on that.
Well, as I say, we have been having the weekly contract and performance meetings so that we are monitoring and making sure that, you know, improvements are made constantly, and anything that is raised, as Paula said, regarding the medication, that goes through that meeting, and we're asking them what they're doing about it, and we are really monitoring that very, very closely.
Given that significant concern that has been raised, perhaps it'd be helpful to understand what our options are here and what the consequences are to saying no. If we were to say no to this and say no, we can't support this. I haven't clearly asked all governing body members what their position is, but if we were just be saying no, we can't support this because of those concerns, where would that leave us?
Do you want me to have a go at some of that? Others will probably have a view as well. I guess we have the instant issue that if we said no, we'd have to try and commission an alternative unit. And the reason we commissioned Weston Park in the first place is because we couldn't find any alternative units. It was the only one that could be found, and it wasn't just to support the Macclesfield population. It was the whole Cheshire East and even Vale Royal population who could access that unit. The next point would be if we said from the 1st of November it was going, it would take several weeks clearly to scale down the admissions anyway, which would take us into the new year. I guess I've obviously had a number of conversations with people from Paula's team and Tracy's team and Karen and others. I guess the general view is that because of the mitigations that were put in, we are really confident about the quality of care being delivered. Now, you can argue whether that's right or wrong, that we've had to almost invest in several additional services to give us that assurance. But from a patient safety and quality point of view, I receive a great deal of assurance from those discussions. I guess it feels a bit of a rock and a hard place, doesn't it? In an ideal world, yes, you would not have commissioned from this provider in this unit, but there were very good reasons why we, working with the local authority, did that. So I feel that we are between the proverbial rock and hard place on this one. But from a patient point of view, I'm not hearing anything that says they aren't getting really good care. Possibly better than they would get if we got rid of it and started spot purchasing beds all around Cheshire. Going back to Mike's point about what support would they be then getting in terms of some of those additional support services.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Gwyd and then Tracy Cole, please. So Gwyd.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. I can see this is very, very difficult. I've just been reading the overall CQC report, and I take what we're saying about commissioning from services, but I also understand Pam's concern about a provider not really improving over a significant period of time. And I worry what the message is when we continue to commission services with a provider of that ilk. Now, if we are receiving substantial assurance that there isn't a quality of care concern for the patients there, that's fine, but 3 anecdotal reports don't give me that. So I just, you know, I do have concerns about a provider that has required improvements in all domains on a CQC report, you know, especially around things like patient safety. And, you know, I wonder if we've exhausted all opportunities to place these patients elsewhere with organisations that have better CQC reports, you know, have better demonstrable leadership. That's all I wanted to come in on. Thank you.
Thank you. So I can see, Paula, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in before Tracy? In fact, Tracy, have you frozen? No, you haven't.
Paula, do you want to go first?
Sorry, I didn't mean to freeze Tracy out there. I guess the point is about the number of domains in RI. So if we just explain the process. So when they were, the inspection happened in November 19, and they got a rating of requires improvement. The focused inspection that they've gone back to do in August, that they published in September, only went back to focus on 2, which is where the regulatory breaches were. So that's why the number of people have said, you know, about the number of domains as requires improvement. They only went back to do inspection in 2 of them. So until we get a full inspection across all of the domains, that won't change. So it's just to make sure that people understand the technical process of that. And you do have to go through that formal process in order to come out of the requires improvement. And I think the area that we're going to have to focus on really is prior to CQC doing a full inspection is what assurances do we have in place of an improving position, and what mitigations do we have in place for that broader understanding of the service that they're delivering. And the 2 are equally important really, is to focus on where there were the breach around the medication. And the second one was around the assurances that we've got in place. And I do think we've heard a list of assurances that probably exceeds some of those things that are in place in other areas. Is one of the things that is causing me to feel more uncomfortable, to be honest, in the other direction, kind of reflecting on the amount of additional support that's been put into the set at the home, and the positive feedback that's been given. And I guess the really important thing that's playing through this is the value of leadership. You see that there's been a new registered manager in there. If you read the CQC report, a lot of focus there on leadership. And I guess that's why I feel really strongly about the AMP role in there. And that's what's making me start to think, so the advanced nurse practitioner role is actually the value that that very senior clinical leadership brings to many homes. Actually, that, you know, that's the broader issue for me here.
Thank you, Paula. It's helpful. Tracy.
Thank you. I think that if we were able to commission organisations that were rated as good and outstanding across Cheshire, we would be doing that. I think it's we don't have that context here, but there are a large number of organisations and providers across Cheshire and outside of Cheshire that we commission with that are in the requires improvement status, and that is the choice that we have as commissioners. And I'm wondering if that might be something that board would find useful to see, so that we have that, not today, but just an understanding as to where you know, the proportion of our providers that are in each category, and then what we're doing jointly with our local authorities to support them to improve, because I feel that's part of our duty. So I suppose I want to just set that into context, which I think is something that you did a little bit earlier, Dr. Wilson, which is we do have a number of spot purchased and block contracts with organisations that are in a requires improvement state. So this would not be the only one. So I just want to make that clear. I think Pam's conscientious view on this is really, really valuable. I'm very assured that Sam Lacey from Paula Wedd's team has been involved in this. I think it might be helpful to have further understanding as to that continued assurance that we would get that there is quality monitoring and support for improvement, but also how we do that for other organisations. Otherwise, we're singling this one out and potentially handling it differently. And what we haven't put in the paper, I guess, is the implications of not making that decision. And this is about balance of risk. So I am in support of the paper, but would want to make sure that we provide assurance to the board as to how we are supporting that organisation with their continued quality development and making sure that we're monitoring that thoroughly, as we are with all organisations.
Thank you. So I think that's helpful. So I think we're probably into the realms, aren't we, of talking, if we are to support this, what are the measures that we need to be assured of, know that are in place in order to be comfortable to support it. What would be helpful now is to understand is the urgency of the decision today. So is this a decision that needs to be made today, and what are the consequences of not making this decision today?
Yes, I think it needs to be made today, because the contract runs out. The contract runs out at the end of October, so it is urgent that we make the decision today. Okay,
so on that respect, then I suppose the same would apply if the government doesn't support. We will be in the same difficult position with, we certainly won't have a provider or a contract, will we? And we'll be starting from scratch. So I'm going to look towards Pam to say, Pam, are there measures that would, as you articulated on behalf of perhaps others in the governing body, feelings about and being uncomfortable? What measures, or are there measures that would you would feel comfortable with this going ahead with if they were in place?
I think people ought to know my background is in care. To start off with, my background is in local authority, and I've run inspected, deregistered care homes in my past, so that's where I'm coming from. I think if we're going to make this, I understand the timescales we've got. I understand that we need beds like this in the winter. I don't have a problem with that. In terms of what we could do to make me feel better, I think we need to send in the meds management team, and I think we need to look at them more often than every fortnight. But we need there must be an action plan in place. I know Paula will tell me there is an action plan in place following this inspection. But what worries me is that they've consistently not improved on this domain, and it's a very important domain. So without enhanced surveillance from us, I'd be a bit wary. I still worry about approving this, but I get that we've got a problem with timescales.
Paula, I was hoping you were going to put your hand up. Thank you.
So Pam's right about the requires improvement, but there has actually been an improvement within the requires improvement. And I recognise that sounds strange in of itself, but if you look at the detailed report, you'll see that a number of breaches have been addressed. So it's an improving requires improvement. And what I haven't got today, and I apologise, is I haven't got the detail of the action plan around that breach, which obviously is being provided to the CQC, and what has been done about that very, very specific action. One of my reflections is that we made this decision in the summer, and we should be seeing today, I think, in the paper and in the CQC report that's been published since the last decision, an improving position. So it is actually also making me reflect on some of the decisions and conversations we've perhaps had in the summer or didn't have. It is possibly something that I'm reflecting on, because I think we've seen information today of an improving position validated by CQC and by staff feedback.
And by virtue of the fact that this is actually before us today, Paula, I think we can take it read that you don't have a substantial concern about us going ahead with this contract.
I think we're in a situation of mitigating risk. I think that's what we're here to do. And we understand we've got a situation in this care home where essentially they're delivering almost kind of the intermediate care kind of services that were being delivered on a hospital site with some advanced level support into there, medical input into there. And for me, this is about mitigating risk. I think we made a decision in the summer now where we actually see an improving position now. It would be remiss of me to sit here and say that I don't have some concerns, because actually I have to be respectful of the regulator who identified a breach, towards the end of August. I think what's important is to understand what are the consequences of not making the decision. I think that's really important in terms of understanding mitigating risk. And I think the bit that's probably easier to do is to get close to understanding the breaches and what have been done about them, and those action plans and that close quality and oversight. When I saw the paper actually in advance of today, I said it would only be getting my support as advanced nurse practitioner was part of the package, in terms of there's a new registered manager, and really importantly, the feedback, if you look at the CQC report around the NHS staff, around the advanced nurse practitioner and the outcomes from that unit. So there's a number of mitigations that matter for me, but I think it would be glib to say that this is not without risk. It's not without risk going ahead, and it's not without risk actually not making the decision to proceed or not.
Certainly is a balance of risk today. I think you're also saying there is an element with which actually the additional support into this home, which is afforded by this contract, is actually positive in improving the quality of the care overall in the home, not just to those people who are subject to these 16 beds of this contract. So the home might be worse off for removal of this contract and the support that comes with it. Okay, I think we need to make a decision. So I'm going to look to see if there are people who feel that we should not be going ahead with awarding this contract, and then see who is remaining. So those people who are voting members of the governing body, if you could indicate if you feel that you shouldn't be going ahead. Okay, so I think I'm taking it that with the reservations and balances that we've discussed, we are supporting, but we do need to perhaps have some further focus, which I'm sure there has already been focus on the mitigations of the risks around quality and making sure we are monitoring the continued improvement in that quality. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, Andy, can I just, so we don't go in with lack of clarity on what the actions are. I've heard one about medicines management. I know medicines management have been and offered some support previously, but we can reinforce and repeat that. Regular quality reporting, which presumably will go by quality and safeguarding. Are there other specific things we need to make sure that we don't miss?
I wonder whether the way to deal with that is to ask quality and safeguarding to consider this as an ongoing monitoring from them on this contract, which I'm sure is already happening.
Yeah, and I heard earlier probably should report around the other homes as well as this one. We know this one is challenged, but because of the amount of wraparound in this one, we've probably got more sight on this one than well, not any other home, but most other homes in Cheshire. And so, point taken.
Andrew,
Claire?
I've just put it in the chat box in terms of I thought that was actually a really good discussion in terms of the governing body seeking assurance and the right level of challenges. And I think there are a number of points that have been raised that we need to pick up separately outside Mike's point around, why are we putting additional care, additional wraparound services into these beds when there are patients in other beds sort of across Cheshire East, and a load of issues which I'm sure Mandy will have in the minutes, but in the chat box and in the discussion that I think we need to pick up on. I guess for me, we brought it to governing body, which is absolutely the right thing to do, because it would have had to be an extraordinary urgent decision outside of governing body, but it's still very late in the day. If we had said no, what would we have done? We have a week to do something. We have to, this is about, we need to plan ahead. And I know COVID has increasing workload, and we've got to commission new services and react and respond. But I think we need to try and get these sort of conversations earlier in the decision-making process, so the risk isn't so critical in terms of the decision-making. And obviously, this is now to the end of March. We actually have to start decommissioning at the same time as commissioning. So what we don't want to do is be paying April, May, June, July, because the patients haven't moved out of the beds. So actually, it's not 16 beds. And I think the governing body, we need to, assure the governing body that we have a process for doing that. When do we stop admissions into these beds? So we have to manage that out. So I think it's been a really good discussion. So thank you, everybody. There's work that the execs and our respective teams need to pick up outside, but I think we also need to think about the planning for some of these conversations, so we don't have to have urgent decisions, but bring them to governing body in a timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I'm absolutely agree with many of that. So let's move to our recommendations. And it's section 4.3, Western Park extension. It is to approve the commission of 16 block purchase beds from Western Park for a 5-month period from the 1st of November to March 2021 at a cost of £396,000, and to approve for the same period medical cover, advanced nurse practitioner, and note the funding will be recovered from the National Hospital Discharge Policy funding. Thank you very much. That was a good discussion, as Claire has said, so thank you. We can move on. Now, having extended the meeting, we are once again faced with a difficult position because we still have climate change and the EPRR. Now, the EPRR, I think we could do as a remote decision. It isn't complex. It's cool, so we could do that as an approval by email if people are in agreement with that, and if the next 5 minutes is a reasonable time with which to consider the climate change strategy, which I suggest it probably isn't. So there is an option there. We could also defer that. That's an important item. I'm reluctant to defer it. I'm reluctant to have another meeting where we defer items, but we could defer that and give that more time at our next meeting. And I'll look to those that were due to present that item as whether they wish to rush through it in the next 5 minutes or whether they wish to bring that back.
Happy to comment if you want me to.
Go on, Tracy.
I think let's do it properly, as you say, with more time next time. I would love us to do it now, but I'd really invite everybody to take the time to read it, really get under the skin of what's in the paper, and let's do it really well next time, unless I know Gwydian's was set to present and so was Bernadette. The work's been done. We'll keep on going with that, but we'll be looking for governing body support next time to take it to the next step. So that's the warm-up act for next time, ideally, if that's all right.
Lovely. Thank you. Any further comments, Claire?
No, I agree. I think it's a shame it's been deferred, but can we have it as the first substantive agenda item, please, at the next meeting? I know it might change how the agenda's set, but I think we need to give this the importance. We in terms of our signalling in January, this will be the first proper time we have an update, and obviously in terms of our strategic objectives, it fits and delivers those. So I think it's really important we give it the time.
I will commit that we definitely address it and that it has sufficient time.
Thank you. Yeah. But not that it goes to the top.
EPRR, I'm being told, we need to send our response to NHS EI by the 31st October. So we will do that remotely, but we'll need timely responses. People who will already have read it. So if we can give responses electronically to that, Matthew, I think, will sort that out for us afterwards. And that then moves us on to the forward planner, which is for noting. If there's no comments, it brings us on to any other business. There's no further business. I think we can close. Thank you very much for your contributions. And sorry, again, I want to say it was a very busy agenda once again, and we will continue to try to make it less so. But I think we did have time for some important discussions which were helpful. So thank you very much for everybody's contribution, and we will see you next time. Thank you.